I do not envy IO Interactive wanting to make a particular game when audience expectations are themselves so particular. The weight of comparison can be heavy, but it seems like, with 007 First Light, the risk has paid off for IO. The numbers are high for them, both critically and commercially. Against, well, what were pretty favourable odds all things considered, the makers of Hitman have produced a 007 game that critics are really vibing with. For many, it's a genuine Game of the Year contender. As a mega fan of their prior work though, I can't help but find myself rolling credits on First Light feeling a little empty. Like I just experienced something that didn't play to their readily apparent strengths as a developer. Like my peers saw something in this that I just didn't. Because man, while First Light is a competent big budget action title, and even as someone not particularly into Bond as a franchise, a surprisingly compelling story, it comes at such cost to what made the Hitman games so great that I have to say my own expectations were not met. And, you know, as a critic, you're meant to talk about what something is rather than what it isn't. And I can see the comments now telling me how unfair I'm being by even bringing up the prior game the same studio worked on and countless people said was like James Bond and suggested that IO should make a James Bond game as a direct result, and surprised absolutely no one when it was revealed they were the ones working on the official license. Look, even if they are different games, come on, it's not as if the comparison between First Light and the World of Assassination is unwarranted. So much of the UI is the same. So many musical stings transported me right back to Paris or Sapienza. The way Bond moves is often extremely similar. The way levels interconnect and how you navigate them is the same. Hell, even setting aside the direct references to Hitman's past, these levels feel identical. You could plant 47 within them with his moveset and not miss a beat. You get the feeling while playing that this has been the game IO has been angling for the whole time they were making the World of Assassination. They are inviting the comparison. It just makes it all the more unfortunate then, when such similarities make themselves apparent, to see all the ways in which 007 falls disappointingly short of its predecessor. And some of these problems begin to rear their head from the very start of First Light. Look, if there's one thing that defines Hitman, it's that your actions have meaning on some level. From minute one, you can wander into almost any location you like, if you're willing to deal with the aggressive consequences. Even if you don't end up using that trap you set or whatever, it tells you something about 47 and how you relate to him. He's witty, creative, a polymath, he's cold and prepared. And hell, there's every chance things will go off anyway, causing a ripple effect that completely alters your run through any given level. In 007, no such consequences exist for at least the first several hours. QuickTime events automatically pass. The albeit impressive training montage loses a little of its luster when you're told you need to complete a course in 30 seconds or less, only to realise that none of the timers here actually matter. And I guess that's the problem. It feels like very little of what I'm doing in this game actually matters, as the seemingly endless walk and talks attest to, making up a staggering portion of this game's initial runtime and cementing the feature as the worst means of delivering information big budget games have yet come up with. We are in much firmer look but don't touch territory here. If Hitman was at the very least in conversation with the immersive sim genre, First Light, despite its illusions that it's mingling with something more, is a cinematic action title first and foremost, with all the baggage accompanying that moniker. I guess that for all its action and villains and gadgets and the like, I've always viewed the larger James Bond franchise as very British in nature, very safe, stiff upper lip, obsessed with maintaining a veneer of sophistication, uncomfortable with pushing the boat out too much. And all of that becomes pretty apparent when playing First Light. You can never truly mess with anyone but the designated target. You can never dent the Aston Martin, no matter how hard you try. The action set pieces are big, hell, some are even a little novel, but they require every footstep to fall in exactly its preordained manner in order to function. Even separate from the comparison to the studio's prior titles, there's a rigidity to the way this all works that whether you're infiltrating a base or boarding a moving plane or ramping off of a cliff, none of it is so mechanically distinct from the many times you will simply hold up to walk through a corridor to the next cutscene. And I realise I'm painting a pretty harsh picture here, but I will say that it's not that the player improvisation that so defined Hitman has been entirely removed from First Light, just that the dynamics have shifted somewhat. Where action was discouraged in the World of Assassination trilogy, here that same action is where what little mechanical flexibility you're afforded really bears fruit. The moment-to-moment of encounters is certainly not as ruthlessly segmented as other action games of this ilk, where you're awkwardly shifting from cover to cover, statically pointing at enemies and clicking until no enemies remain. Rather, the game features an almost John Wick-esque fervour in finding the most fluid path through to your target and letting no hurdle halt your progress towards it. It's not entirely dissimilar to a runner game, where each obstacle has its own selection of bespoke mechanical responses and where the maintenance of flow is at a premium. There are certain sections, especially later on, where the realization of just how much more effective it is to throw a gun at an enemy rather than spend what few bullets are in it leads to moments of sheer, unbridled propulsion that elevate it to one of the more notable entries in its genre. It's just such a shame then that those segments, as transcendent as they can be, are relatively sparse, and that they come at the direct cost of the complex puzzle box stealth encounters that IO have been so good at, that would have so suited this setting. Everything outside of the gunplay itself is ludicrously simplistic. Rather than centering the choices the player makes, each act now treats the peaks and troughs of tension like a movie would. The expectation that you're going to be building to a huge action set piece, and that said set piece must stand as the climax of a mission, necessitates that the lead up, that player-driven maelstrom, is no longer the thing, the juice that it's so clearly served as previously. As a result, the gadgets I typically associate with Bond are few and, for the most part, pretty ineffectual, with decidedly limited utility when enemies are already as daft as they are, and indeed when they're up against James Bond. Look, I know that Bond, especially in recent years, has been seen more as an action franchise, but I suppose that when both Hitman and 007 have been so associated with cool, suave, sophisticated social stealth, blending in and working a way out of the resulting binds the characters find themselves in, it just feels a little anticlimactic that the best option is almost always just to run directly in and beat people up. The legitimately neat gunplay encounters few and far between compared to deeply simplistic Arkham-style brawls. Forget Hitman, this is diet Watch Dogs. And the movie it's all in service of, it's actually surprisingly neat. I can't really say I've ever been much of a Bond guy, and this doesn't really seem like it's breaking any new ground in its origin story, but they really could not have picked a more DreamWorks looking human being to play 007. It's legitimately perfect casting. The smarm is so abundant, but there's an ownership of that fact, a luxuriating in just how dickish some of these characters are, that it all comes around to being rather charming. And listen, as a Scot, it's pretty difficult to win me over with the antics of an organisation so reverent towards king and country. But I guess that's what's at the core of why the comparison to IO's prior work leaves First Light coming up so short for me. Hitman's moment-to-moment action may look silly, but it all tells a story. Hitman is about the seedy underbelly of the elite, allowing you to sneak behind the curtain, witness it for yourself, and use good old-fashioned ingenuity to put a stop to it, exemplifying the critical fragility of that utterly corrupt world when met with the slightest of pressure from a plan put together with sticks and glue. And sure, while 007's story does eventually place Bond at odds with elements of the institution he's a part of, its reliance on AI and the like, it's not as if the intelligence service cutting deals with murderous warlords suddenly becomes clean with the human touch. Mechanically, there are far more parts of that institution that feel a whole lot more immovable, unflinching in their dominance. No matter how hard you try, you can never dent the Aston Martin, the Land Rover. Obstacles in your way are ads for the sleek new Coke Zero variant. Certain areas, certain actions are off limits. Bond, and therefore you, are tasked with upholding the image of that institution, the sophistication of the elite. Agents are said to have limited life expectancy, but hey, you seem to get a pretty fun roller coaster ride on the way down, as long as you do exactly as you're told, that you keep your limbs inside the car at all times. 007 First Light is not a bad game, but it is resolutely standard. And as such, the game's premise, as compelling a concept as 007 tackled by the Hitman people is, will always leave me wondering what could have been. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked the video, you can help me out by becoming a channel member via the join button on YouTube or subscribing to my Patreon. A massive thanks to those patrons who you can see on screen and are all getting access to exclusive, fully produced videos that aren't available here. Your continued support on patreon.com/writingongames is what allows me to keep going with the work I do on this channel, and I seriously cannot express how grateful I am for that. You are all the best. Special thanks go to Alistair Dunn, Tobias Holmbeck, Brendan Hess, Bryce Snyder, Cameron Siniseros, Charles J. Liu, Charlie Kimball, Christopher Faherty, Dallas Keane, Danis Sikauskis, David Björk, David Butkus, Dolly Bowman, Leah Chinello, Lynn Browning, Luke Shaw, Mark B. Writing, Mason Miller, Matthew Grover, Michael Tritt, Rickety Cricket, Thomas Ive, Timothy Jones, Vitautis Catharsis, Young Condor, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you all so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.